Good morning, everyone. We'll make a start. Make sure we keep to time today. This is workshop 4 in our series, and this workshop is for 90 minutes. So we'll be finishing at 1 p.m. There will be an opportunity at the end of the call to stay on and connect with others for another half an hour. The call will be open till 1:30. This is workshop 4, and just to remind everyone, only parts of the workshop will be recorded. Workshops 1, 2, and 3 are available on the website. Today's session recording will be available on the website by our next session. We will be using Slido, and although this may be new for some of you, it's fairly easy to use. So you need to use a smartphone if you can get that ready. Those of you who don't have a smartphone or don't wish to use Slido, you can post comments and responses in the chat throughout the session today. It would be great if you can have your videos on, particularly helpful when we move into the breakout rooms. It will improve the quality of the conversations that we have together when we're in those smaller breakout rooms. In general, if you can keep your mics on mute, as I've said, we'll be using Slido and the Zoom chat box throughout. There may be a lot of us on the call, so don't worry if you can't keep up with the chat. We'll be producing a briefed after workshop report that will include information from the chat, as well as some synthesis from what's discussed. The report will be available on our website by the next workshop. And it would be great if you could share your experiences throughout and after the workshop on the Twitter hashtags, which are on the screen at the minute. So this is the narrative arc that runs across the series of our workshops, and we'll be primarily exploring what this means for individuals' personal skills development, although we also want to pay attention to and help people focus on what it means for their teams, their organizations, and the wider improvement community. The need to work collaboratively is more relevant than ever, and the skills to do this are more critical than they have ever been. In recent months, we've heard that there appears to be a real appetite for newfound collaborations to continue as teams look to the future. And one tool that might be of use to support everyone in making this a reality is the Skills for Collaborative Change framework, developed by Q and Nesta, that looks at the skills and attitudes needed for collaborative change. It comprises of 3 overall skills: learn by doing, initiate change, and bringing people together. From this framework, we've shaped a series of 6 workshops, and this series has been shaped by your needs. And in workshop 1, you told us what was of interest to you. And from your poll results, the series will follow those themes within that framework. Each session is designed as a standalone session, so you can dip in and out, but we would encourage as many of you to come as many of those sessions as possible, as they do connect well together. So today's focus is on tolerating uncertainty. This skill permeates the workshop, and we'll ask you to bear this in mind as you listen, share, and reflect throughout the course of today. So to kick us off, we would like to run a quick poll with the following question. Using a scale of 1 to 4, with 4 being very comfortable, how comfortable are you with uncertainty? And if you can pop your mics on mute, that would be great. You can either use Slido, if you can scan the QR code, or pop your answers in chat. That's great. You can see as the score's balancing out, as we get more votes in. I think over the last 2 years, this is something we've all had to deal with, is uncertainty. So it may be that we're feeling a little bit more robust than we have done in the past. That's great. Think about how comfortable you feel and where you've answered on that scale as we go through the session. So Today, to support us in exploring the skill of uncertainty, we've got the team with us. So there's myself, Dominic Bird, and Des and Mandy facilitating. We've got logistical support from Sue and Emma, and our case contributors, case example contributors are joining us. I think we've got Kerry on the call at the moment. Rian may be joining us later. But here are some of the principles for how we will be working together during this session, but also throughout the series. So these are interactive sessions, and we've designed activities to support you to have useful conversations by learning together through collaborative and peer learning. We want this to be a safe and supportive space for people to share openly with each other, recognizing that this is a very difficult time for many of us. Each of the session in the series is shaped by the feedback that we receive from you. So please do add your comments and reflections throughout the session. And we aim to give you the time and space to process your thoughts in breakout rooms and some time at the end for individual reflection and consideration of the learnings and action that you may wish to take forward. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Des, who's going to take us through the next set of slides.
Thank you, Dom, and good morning, everybody. So we're just going to take a minute so that you can reflect as we ask you another question. So the question is, what uncertainties are you seeing, feeling, or sensing? So as before, you can use Slido or pop into the Zoom chat. All right. So somebody's already shared COVID, and yeah, I think that has been common across all of us and all organisations. Got the future of workplace conditions. So I'm wondering if that's something about how that has changed during COVID for us all. Some insecurities about work and restructuring, and resourcing the priorities. I think, yeah, as organisations, there's something about how across sectors and across different parts of internal businesses, we agree what those priorities are or should be. Children's education. Yeah, again, I think that's been a big one for a lot of us, just in terms of children being away from formal structured education and the impact it's had on those of us who need to have caring responsibilities as well. And the impact of Brexit, yeah, another one common across all of us, I think. It's an interesting one there. A real lack of succession planning in the NHS, with many skilled professionals retiring. And I think maybe that's become more acute, that people have noticed that in the current environment. I think that's been there for a while. And a big general one there about society. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate that. And we'll incorporate your feedback and sharing into the after workshop report. Okay. Thank you very much for that. All right, we're going to move on to a model that we've been using throughout the workshop, and we'll continue throughout the workshop series, and we'll continue to do so. So for those of you that are new, I will just give you a brief on that. And for those of you that have joined us previously, just a bit of a reminder of the model. Okay, so the quadrant you can see in the top left, learning with and from peers. So how we're going to do that today is by giving you an opportunity to hear from colleagues who have hands-on experience in doing an improvement as they share their case examples of improvement work and change. Moving across to learning by doing. So we're going to do this by giving you opportunities for sharing experiences and discussions with others in breakout rooms, as well as the time and space for self-reflection, which is something that you've let us know is really important. Then we're going to move on to learning for action. So we're going to do this through you being inspired by each other into new ways of doing things, also by creating impact by formulating actionable goals. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And through deciding on actions, small or big, of doing things differently to generate better outcomes using a skills continuum, which we'll introduce to you a little bit later. And learning beyond the workshop, you all appreciate that just attending a workshop isn't just enough about getting that real learning experience. So what we're going to do is look at some ways that we can support you in using your new skills in your daily practice. And we're also going to give you an opportunity to join the Cymru network. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well, and also give you an opportunity for some direct networking after this workshop. And then learning with and from peers. So looking at the first part of the model for learning, we're going to spend some time to learn with and from some peers who've kindly given their time to us today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome and introduce Rhian and Kerry, who are going to share some key learnings and themes emerging from their own work and how tolerating uncertainty was the integral approach to their work. So over to you, Kerry and Rhian.
Thanks, Des. So hi, my name's Kerry, and I'm the inpatient nurse manager in the Marie Curie Hospice in Cardiff and the Vale. And my lovely colleague is somewhere else on the line here. So we just wanted to share our story, really. There was lots of things when we were asked to sort of join the workshop today that we could have discussed, I think, with the subject of uncertainty. But we kind of chose PPE, which is personal protective equipment, which for us and anybody in healthcare will know was one of the biggest challenges I think we faced, certainly in the first sort of part of the pandemic. So, and we titled it sort of when supply goes up and demand goes down, because that was the scenario that happened, I suppose, overnight. So just to give a little background, so I'll talk about my role in the inpatient unit, and then Rhian will talk and share some of her experiences out in the community across Wales. But in the inpatient unit, we would normally have 28 inpatients, and as all healthcare areas, we would use personal protective equipment in lots of scenarios in our day-to-day practice. Things like so you would have heard or through the press, surgical face masks. That's probably something we would probably use a dozen of in 6 months. Very rarely would we use them. We'd have a small supply here at the hospice just in case. But overnight for us, sadly, we were hit very early on in the pandemic, and we had an outbreak very early, just before government guidance had been issued. And overnight, our sort of requirement for PPE increased dramatically. So just to put it in context, where I said sort of 6 face masks or a dozen face masks would have probably kept, we wouldn't have used in 6 months. We were needing 200 a day to look after patients according to the guidance at that time. So as you can imagine, trying to get hold of things like face masks when the whole of the country were trying to do exactly the same was a massive challenge. Same with more sort of commonly used equipment like gloves and aprons. Our usage increased probably 20-fold. So we would normally chug along getting our personal protective equipment every week, ordered through something called NHS Supplies, which would be an online catalogue used by the NHS, but also used by the independent sectors as well. So we would order our PPE every week, no problem at all. What happened was that the supply chain was cut off from the personal protective equipment, because all supplies were being diverted through to the NHS, where it was desperately needed, but made it extremely difficult then for anybody outside of the NHS to actually get their hands on any supplies. On top of that, obviously, from a national perspective, we didn't actually have the supplies, so we didn't have face masks, we didn't have eye protection, and the volume that we needed. So our challenge, obviously, was to keep an extremely anxious workforce safe. more importantly, keep our patients that we had here safe, and keep delivering the service, because we were really conscious of how, essential just keeping services going were in this time. So the press that was out there, and if you turned on your news, everybody was trying, or schools, businesses, everybody was making PPE, which was incredible, absolutely incredible, and the public response was amazing. The challenge was that within a few weeks there was guidance on PPE. So whilst we were having deliveries of certain products such as visors, we couldn't actually use them in healthcare, because they didn't meet the specifications, the safety specifications that we needed, to be able to confidently allow our staff to use. So that was incredibly hard, turning things away, and in a time that everybody knew that everybody was desperate. So our supply rocketed, and our demand rocketed, sorry, and our supply really was cut off to our normal supply. So what did we do? I suppose this was, I'm trying to think back before doing this presentation. It seems a little bit of a blur now, to be perfectly honest. But I think people and networking was our biggest resource and what saved us. So whilst systems, computers are great, and we talk about that sort of predictable, if you're working in a predictable area of work and you've got that certainty and you can plan, that's great. But actually when it all goes up in smoke, actually we come back down to the human factor, is what our experience was. So we were networking, we were contacting colleagues. There was no official route to go through to get supplies, because everybody was struggling. Any of our colleagues in the NHS had their own areas that they needed to prioritise. But we managed to get supplies in bits and sections, and from here and from there, partly through the health board, who were excellent. But again, that was about actually picking up the phone and speaking to somebody that you knew, who would make sure that they'd spoken to somebody else that they knew, to put surprise rather than anything official, which was, when we talk about uncertainty, was a really stressful kind of time to be in, really, that we were relying on friends and contacts rather than having something formal set up. Marie Curie as an organisation, we had always ordered independently. So each hospice across, there's 9 hospices across the country, and we'd ordered our PPE supply independently. The nursing service across the country, all the teams, they would access their supply either through NHS supplies like we do in the hospice, or more local suppliers. But Marie Curie recognised, obviously, very early on, because they were hearing from us all the time, but we were really struggling to get hold of PPE. So lots of people were sort of brought in from different departments to form a small team to look at it centrally, to have a bigger voice, I suppose, in one area, so that we could compete to get PPE and we could be high on the priority list, even though we weren't an NHS sort of establishment. So that was, and that, I suppose, when we think about things going forward and things that have now been sort of set up and how we look at the future, has been a real big asset. We've kept that supply chain as such centrally. And with that comes the support of all the other different Marie Curie hospices and Marie Curie nursing service. So we've got a much better network, I think, between us all, for sharing equipment if there's an issue with supply. We've had issues in the last few weeks with delivery because of drivers and things like that. So to be able to actually draw on that network that's been set up has been a massive asset. But I think the other part was, like I said, coming from the health board, coming from local suppliers. We've got catering suppliers in Cardiff who we were getting aprons and gloves from. It was very much a case of ringing round, and I suppose that's where it comes back to the human factor. And in healthcare, I think if you work in healthcare, you know how valuable the people are your workforce, and your people are probably the best resource that you've got. but they're the best resource from our experience you've got when you're facing unpredictability or uncertainty, because they can be flexible, whereas systems tend not to be. So if anything I've learned is it's valuing that network and that, making relationships, forming relationships, because I honestly think that's what kept our unit open throughout the pandemic. I'm going to stop talking because I would probably go on for ages. So I'm going to hand you over to Rhian, who's there somewhere.
Thank you, Kerry. It was very much the same for us in the community, in regards to working with the health boards and basically trying to lay a hands on whatever we could. We've got really good relationships with the health boards across Wales. So they were, we were really lucky, and they were really generous, if you like, in sharing their PPE with us, because we're actually looking, the care we deliver to these patients is joint care. So they needed to be sort of sharing that with us. And those relationships, I think, have just got stronger and stronger through all of this. Slightly different from the hospice, because all of the PPE was delivered to the Cardiff and Vale Hospice. However, we've got services right across Wales. So the issue for me in managing that was, how are we going to get that up to North Wales, Mid Wales, West Wales? So again, those relationships, that human factor, we relied heavily on our fundraising colleagues. We'd have the fundraiser from Cardiff driving to Powys to meet the fundraiser from North Wales to take it up to the staff in North Wales. So that was how we got around that until the fundraisers were furloughed, and then couldn't really help us out with that. So we had a colleague whose husband worked for a bank at the time, and the bank released him for 1 day a week to help us deliver the PPE around Wales, which was absolutely invaluable. So, we can't thank our colleagues enough, and husbands and whoever sort of got involved in that. Also, one of the biggest things for us, again, in the PPE, hand sanitizer. We just could not get hold of any of that. And that was one of the things, we urgently needed. So we rang round breweries, not only for the hand sanitizer, but so we had the Gower Gin Company donated a load of hand sanitizer to us, and again, trying to distribute it all across Wales. Like Kerry said, we were inundated with support from schools, with advisors. Sadly, we weren't able to use them. And also we had to double up on our PPE because we've got a lot of pool cars around Wales. So in order for staff to travel safely together, they had to wear the PPE in the pool cars. So all of that donning and doffing the PPE, it was a lot of work for the staff, really stressed staff. And just, as Kerry said, that human factor of staff meeting on the M4, Mid Wales, just trying to get all of the equipment out. And I've got to say, through the whole of the pandemic in the community, our care didn't drop. We still delivered as much care as we've always delivered out to the patients, so the patients didn't suffer, which was a huge, huge thing for us. So like Kerry said, all of the PPE now gets distributed from a central point, as does the testing, where our staff test 3 times a week. So we've got quite a slick process, we like to think, going on now, and long may that continue. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you, Rhian. Thank you, Kerry. Just before I open it up, if anybody's got any questions, again, feel free to either use Slido, Zoom chat, I'll open up your mics in a second. But I think one of the things that stood out as you were both speaking to us was the fact that you were managing all of this uncertainty through a lot of relationships that yourselves and the extended Marie Curie family have built up over the years to enable you to keep this going when literally you've only got one chance to get it right for those patients, their families and friends when it comes to end of life care. So thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to open it up to everybody. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask Kerry or Rian? And as I say, feel free to put it in the chat or on Slido, but I'd really appreciate if somebody wants to open up their mic and ask a question. So while you're all thinking about that, I've got another question that I'd like to ask Kerry and Rian. What helps you to be able to look over the horizon, so beyond what's immediate, in terms of continuing to work towards that long-term vision for Marie Curie and what it does for the patients and families that it serves?
I suppose for me, it's that anything is now possible. But we survived, we got through, as Rian said, care wasn't compromised, which for us was the most important. Neither was staff safety. So it feels, after 18 months of rolling with that uncertainty and that unpredictability and that changing guidance on a daily basis and thingy, it's become, I don't want to say the new norm because that's a little bit, but I think it's feeling like we hit rock bottom and we survived. And so for me, that's I think how I look forward, think, okay, we'll cope, we'll deal with it, whatever comes, we will deal with it.
And I agree with that, Kerry, you know, and again, bringing in those relationships, the human factor, and we all do it for the staff and the patients, and that's what sees us sort of through what we need to come through. You know, this has been a massive, massive challenge for everybody, not just our organisation, for everybody's organisation, I think. And we've all had maybe different challenges, but certainly for us, I think the patients and the families and the staff and ensuring all that safety.
Yeah, and when we think about PPE, you know, knowing that actually there is some better systems. So whereas it was hours of hours as managers who were trying to run units, manage staff, anxiety and everything, this was obviously added to actually have a central team now, which are doing that running around for us in place. You know, thinking about going forwards, that will be something they will be able to manage. And again, as Rian said, with the health boards, we've always had good relationships, but I think now knowing that we're recognised as sitting under a certain umbrella there and that we can directly access systems, so just feeling more confident, I suppose, the systems are now in place.